Well, it is so great to be here on the Sports Spectrum podcast, and even better to welcome my friend, ESPN's Chris Mortensen, here with me. Mort, you've been in this space before, and it's such a pleasure and a privilege to be here with you, fresh off the NFL draft. So how was it? How are you doing?
Doing well. It's by the way, I'm wearing the clothes that I was going to wear on the third day of the draft, only because of some technical issues or whatever. I never really got on, so I said, you know what, I'm gonna put this tie and the shirt and coat on for this little broadcast right here, so it didn't go to waste. But
very
the draft
dapper,
was,
I might add.
yeah, yeah, sure. As you know, my first assignment for ESPN was 31 years ago, doing the NFL draft. Fred Gaudelli was the producer back then. He's now the NBC executive producer for Sunday Night Football. But that was my first ever event for ESPN. And 31 years later, I did probably the least amount of time I ever did on TV. But it was an exciting draft. I always enjoy it. You spend a lot of time in preparation. And the thing about it, you might think, well, I did all this prep. Did I waste the prep? I didn't get very much on. But no, what happens is you carry it with you into the season and the season later. There's so many notes on these guys and anecdotes. You get to learn them a little bit, and you learn them as you go, and you end up going back and saying, oh, yeah, I remember this about this guy when he came out and was drafted by, X team.
What a life lesson that is, though, right? Because I think sometimes as we learn and we're moving along, we don't necessarily realize, oh, wait, like this actually could be hugely beneficial down the road in a way that maybe I'm not anticipating or expecting right now.
Yeah. And I know that to be true because I've experienced it. In other words, like I've had drafts, and when Adam Schefter came on board, we kind of had to talk about, hey, don't get too frustrated because the draft is a madhouse. It's you never know where it's going to turn, and you may not get everything in, but guess what? There's going to be a time during the season when one of these great notes on this young man is going to come back, and you're going to be able to use it for the first time. So yeah, it is a great lesson. Don't throw away your notes. Don't tear up your files out of your laptop and all those things.
What was the moment in this draft that stood out to you, Mort?
Jade, without question, it was when the 49ers drafted Trey Lance, quarterback, North Dakota State. As you know, the 49ers, a little bit more than a month before that, had traded from 12-3, giving up a couple ones, and swapping spots there with who was picking three? The Dolphins were picking
the Miami
three.
Dolphins. Yep.
Yeah, and so they swapped spots, and then they got a third round pick, and then 2 future ones. And we were pretty much told. Let me just say this: we had good sources that said they traded up to get Mac Jones. They knew that was their guy. They had studied tape. But at the same time, Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch, the general manager, had made it clear that they also had a month to evaluate the other quarterbacks and compare them just to make sure, even though they weren't naming Mac Jones, we knew privately it was Mac Jones. That was who they traded up for. And I think what it meant was that at the very least, if these other guys don't measure up or measure ahead, in our opinion, in terms of how we visualize them in our offense, then we know we got Mac Jones, and we know he can do it because that's the type of guy that I've used to run my offense. I'm speaking about from a Kyle Shanahan standpoint.
So they felt comfortable making the trade based upon the idea of taking Jones, but felt like we still had time to due diligence to see if perhaps there was somebody else like Trey Lance that they would wind up valuing greater than Jones. Is that fair?
That is fair. And I can tell you that their personnel department had very high grades on Trey Lance, who was an intriguing prospect because, as you know, because of the pandemic, they didn't have a season, but they played one kind of showcase because they were playing in spring, but they played one showcase game in the fall against Central Arkansas. And what's weird about it is it wasn't a good game for him. He had thrown no interceptions the year before, 28 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. He actually threw an interception against Central Arkansas, but they were just not having that much tape, recent tape on Trey Lance. Made some teams nervous, and it made the 49ers a bit nervous. But they had time, gave themselves a full month to fully evaluate Mac Jones even further, Trey Lance, and we'll throw Justin Fields of Ohio State in there. Mm-hmm. And Trey Lance just met, I think, the standards, the vision for Kyle Shanahan. But I can tell you there was a surprise because even on the day of the draft, everybody I know and trusted said it was going to be Mac Jones. Now, we didn't report it, that it was going to be Mac Jones. And maybe having rules like you can't report it, because that was our rules. The
Sure.
networks have kind of saved us from looking like fools. Because I would have reported they're going to take Mac Jones. But you're sitting there watching them in the green room, and you're seeing that Mac Jones is not answering his phone, which is usually the call you get from the team when that team is on the clock. And all of a sudden, and Trey Lance and Justin Fields aren't answering their phones. Justin wasn't there, but he was in another at home. But all of a sudden, you see Trey Lance answer the phone, and you say to yourself, "Oh my goodness!"
Here we go.
And then they announce the pick, and it's Trey Lance, quarterback, North Dakota State. And that to me was by far the biggest moment in the draft, and it also set up pretty much the rest of the first half of the draft as well.
Yeah, and of course it was, the Chicago that wound up making the move, to move up to get Fields, and then Mac Jones falling, if you will, given that many people thought he was going to go at 3 to New England, but a place that he has said he always hoped to play.
Yeah, and I can verify that. I know Mac pretty well, and I can tell you that this is a guy who kind of grew up. I don't know if idolizing Tom Brady is the right word, but not that would make him exclusive. I mean, who doesn't use Tom Brady as a role model? But Mac Jones has read everything about Tom Brady. Has watched probably every game. Has probably watched every throw. TB12, all the stuff about that Tom's done beyond football. Mac was so familiar with it. So, and I do know that even before the 49ers traded up, that the connection, the chemistry between Mac Jones and the Patriots was palpable. And him with Josh McDaniels, the offensive coordinator of the Patriots, even to the point where, and teams do this, is, hey, here's our playbook. Next time we talk, we're going to talk about the playbook. And here's how we're going to use you. Almost like it was going to be matter of fact, except when the 49ers traded up, it wasn't matter of fact. But then it turned out, boom, at 15, he goes to the team that he really did want to go to. I can tell you that. But he lost some money. When you pick 15th compared to where you pick 3rd, you do lose some money. Although I will note that San Francisco is in California and the tax rates are considerable.
Well, and I like what Mac Jones had to say after the fact too, which was, it's not where you're taken, it's what you do with the opportunity. And you talk about that playbook in New England. It's an extensive one.
Yes.
But that's something that it benefits him in a way, if I believe to be.
No question about it. Alabama ran a pro offense for the most part and really expanded playbook. Steve Sarkisian, their former offensive coordinator, who's now the head coach at the University of Texas, he told me that in all his years of coaching college quarterbacks, because he'd been an offensive coordinator in the pros too, but he'd never given as much volume of a playbook week to week as he did with Mac Jones. And he couldn't say enough about it. He goes, and he went out and had a perfect season and led a perfect team. Alabama didn't lose.
Sure.
And he had as good a season as could be. I would add though that that attracted certainly the 49ers to Mac Jones, that ability, and he a little better athlete than give him credit for. The guy was a heck of a tennis player. Right? You could probably challenge anybody in the NFL and beat him in tennis. So he's got good feet. What do we talk about Tom Brady? Okay, he's not fast, but man, does he have great pocket awareness and mobility, move those feet around? But Trey Lance was a guy highly intelligent, football IQ, great character, humility, tough. I think for Kyle Shanahan, it meant, wow, I can run a different offense. When I was in Washington football team, when his dad, Mike Shanahan, was the head coach, he had Robert Griffin III and Kirk Cousins, same rookie year. Well, they went with Robert Griffin III, obviously. He was the second pick in the draft, and he won Rookie of the Year. But there was a love with Kirk Cousins. And kind of you had, Trey Lance might be a more physical type of Robert Griffin III, bigger, absolutely, smart, like Mac Jones. Can't go wrong with Mac Jones, but with Trey Lance, I'm allowed to play 11 on 11 football. By that, I mean, you got to account for Mac Jones as a runner too. And he is a bull. I mean, he's smart, he's humble, he's tough, and he's got a strong arm. What he doesn't have is playing time in terms of the this past year. That's what bothered people. There wasn't a lot of tape on him.
Sure, sure. And that's so much of what the evaluation, of course, is based on is, what Trey Lance was doing on that tape and being able to watch it. What do you think watching him is going to look like in terms of timing, Mort?
Well, in terms of like, when is he going to actually
Yes.
play?
When's he going to play? I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of people who thought maybe he's too green, and obviously they have Jimmy Garoppolo right now, so they have it. They have optionality, you could say. When do you think people will see him on the field?
Uh, I personally think there's a possibility we see Trey Lance week 1. Now that's not what's being spun. They're saying, hey, Jimmy Garoppolo's the guy. This is why we kept him. And that may turn out to be true. Maybe because we still don't know what this offseason is going to be like. We know the union is trying to cut back the offseason.
Sure.
I think that's
the
a
COVID
dangerous
implication.
place.
Yep.
I think some of them are using it for COVID for an excuse. When J.C. Treader, the president of the NFL Players Association, the center for the Cleveland Browns, he said he just wants no offseason ever again. And we're not going to get into reasons why I think that's a bad idea. But I will say this, Trey Lance, if he can handle the mental part, which Kyle Shanahan thinks he can, and Kyle Shanahan's excited about making teams defend him a different way than they have since he became head coach of the 49ers. And so I'm seeing him play more games than Jimmy Garoppolo. And, I still think we'll see what happens with Jimmy Garoppolo. If for some reason something happens before the season where they end up trading him.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch, as it always is. You make an investment in that quarterback, and sometimes people clamor for them to play, and sometimes that doesn't work out, and sometimes it does. So it's always fascinating to watch how it all sort of transpires and unfolds. Trey Lance was one of the quarterbacks and one of the players taken in this draft, along with Justin Fields and then Micah Parsons, who referenced their faith when it came to the opportunity to play in the National Football League. So how have you seen players in incorporating that aspect of who they are as a person change over the course of your tenure covering the NFL, Mort?
Well, I think what happened is that people, I think people of faith, whatever that faith was, basically decided, this is who I am. I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ, or if they're of another faith, they're not ashamed of it, and they're sharing that. Now, I covered Major League Baseball before I crossed over to the NFL. This is the mid '80s, and when I came over, Reggie White, defensive end, Philadelphia Eagles, he's the one guy that I got to know very well personally. But he always talked his faith, whether you were willing to listen to him or not. But he wore it on his sleeve. But he didn't just talk the talk; he walked the walk. And he had a great voice, and he was somebody that had influence in his own locker room, but influence around the league as well. So we also saw that, we saw players start to come together in the middle of the field after a game and pray together from opposite teams. So we saw them living out their faith. We actually saw some players kneel in the end zone, and some people, let's face it, there were fans who didn't like that, but they were going to live their faith out. And I talked about Reggie being in the Philadelphia Eagles, but Joe Gibbs, the head coach, Hall of Fame head coach with what we call the Washington football team now, Joe has been a tremendous influence in my own walk, even before I became what I would call a committed believer. In fact, I got a devotional book here that Joe Gibbs sent me. But before that, Joe had written a book about his life and his failings, how he had given his life to Christ at 9 years old, but he really wasn't living the life. He and his wife, Pat, they had a lot of financial troubles because of bad decisions Joe made. In fact, Joe writes in the book, listen to your wife. Don't think you can make. Wives have more wisdom than the men do. But these were trying times for Joe Gibbs. I mean, these were excruciating times. He recommitted himself to the Lord. And I just remember having conversations with him. And yes, they were mostly football, but we'd occasionally cross paths and talk about our faith. And he'd always marvel at the Bible itself, because he talked about how many years it took to write the Bible, how it all came together. He says, heck, it's tough enough for us to write a playbook for a season. How could the Bible? And he said, when you take all the Old Testament, the prophecies, and match it up with the New Testament and see how those prophecies were fulfilled, it just kind of strengthened his faith walk. But I will say this: after he won his third Super Bowl, and it was in Minnesota against the Buffalo Bills, it was the time that Thurman Thomas forgot his helmet. Remember? I don't know if you remember that moment for the Buffalo Bills. But afterwards, Washington won the Super Bowl. It was Joe's third Super Bowl. And apologies to Joe Theismann for this. Joe winning his third Super Bowl with 3 different quarterbacks. Now, he went to 2 with Joe, and Joe was a great player. But during the week, and especially on the day after the Super Bowl, his press conference, guys are wasted. They've had a long season, and they're tired. And sure enough, I'm watching Joe up at the podium, and I'm saying, this man hasn't slept all night, and he looks like he's glowing. His countenance was remarkable. And so his countenance to me, like I said, whatever he has, I want that. I want some of that. And that began, I think, a lot of those things kind of came together for me to eventually walk down the path to the Lord. There were other great moments I've talked about before, just by my wife, Mickey, playing a major role in that too. So, but yeah, you listen, we've had so many different experiences. We went to a Pro Bowl one time, by the way. It's as a family, Mickey and my son Alex, and we got invited to a Bible study. I can remember being in this, mostly players, some team chaplains and coaches going to this Bible study, and it was a little bit, we were probably more conservative in terms of how church was, but next thing I know, man, we're on our knees, and I'm kneeling. I'm prime time. Deion Sanders on his knees, and he gets up, and it was more Pentecostal, like, and I can remember saying, "You got to come to my church." He said, "We're going to run." In other words, and it was, I'll never forget it, but it was fun. I mean, it really was fun watching people do that, and that's gone on just through people in the NFL. I mean, I have a great relationship with the Manning family, Archie Manning.
Sure.
When I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer in January 2016, much to my surprise, the Manning camp that year passed out wristbands, which was MPA, Manning Passing Academy, for Mort. And, they had chapel, they prayed for me. But, from during that entire time and every day since then, I get a text early in the morning with a Bible scripture from Archie that he also shares with his family. So, it's just so many people in the NFL that it plays out with. And I've just been blessed enough to be part of that.
It's interesting, fun fact, but my very first day as a young reporter in Philadelphia was actually the day that Reggie White's number was retired at Lincoln Financial Stadium in Philadelphia. They were playing the Seahawks that night. And to me, I hear the stories about Reggie, and it makes me think about the impact that he had on players like a Brian Dawkins, who you and I both know. So what kind of connections have you seen forged between players because of guys like Reggie, who are outspoken about their faith, Mort?
So many. I mean, I really felt there was a revival. I think Reggie, Darrell Green, who was with Washington, those guys seemed to start a revival. Chris Carter in Minnesota, and
sure,
I just saw them have that influence. And it wasn't for everybody, but at the same time, you saw people, they're out there literally. And back then, the rules were different. Football's physical no matter how they play. But back then, man, go ask Troy Aikman about getting hit by Reggie White and the Philadelphia Eagles front four. It was something else. And to be honest with you, as you mentioned, Reggie having his number retired, even I'll never forget the day he died. It was December 26, 2004. And that happened to be a Sunday. And we were doing Sunday NFL Countdown. And about an hour and a half before it started, and we're already in the studio area, we get word that Reggie has died. All the details weren't known.
And this was sudden. We should reference this was sudden. This was not expected, by any stretch of the means.
Not expected. And we were all shocked. And then it's a matter of, okay, how do we get our act together? Because we're going to have to, this is going to be our show, a good portion of our show.
Sure.
And they asked me if I would go co-host on a side set. And they called Mike Golick up. Mike had been his teammate with the Philadelphia team, and asked Mike if he could come in. And Mike did come in, and there was a segment where Mike and I just talked about Reggie. And I really wanted that Mike, express himself the best way he could. He got very emotional, as you can think. And I could feel the emotions. I probably had more emotions before I started the segment, but I felt like I really needed to pull it together as a co-host, so to speak. And there were times when he just broke down and cried. And there was a moment there where I could feel the Holy Spirit grab hold of me and give me the composure I needed and compassion that I think needed to be shown to let Mike really share in that moment with millions or whoever was watching, his love and the emotional breakdown, and the way he honored Reggie in that moment. Those moments are unforgettable. And you wish you had not experienced it, but I know this much: for me, God was in it. There's no question.
Community is so important to us in so many ways. And you think about the community within a locker room, like with, Mike Golick there and Reggie White and how they came together. And then you think about the community that you've been able to create, within the NFL and covering it. And Jim Kelly is someone that comes to mind. He worked with you on Countdown for a while. And then you guys also reunited over health challenges down the road.
Yes.
So how have the two of your paths sort of woven throughout the course of the years?
Jim's just a great guy. He's a great guy before he knew Christ. Listen, he married his wife Jill. You'd have to go read the book, but there's a lot of pain in that marriage. And of course, and then of course they had a son with a challenging handicap, Krabbe's disease. His son Hunter. But he knew of my faith. And Jill was working on him, certainly, and he'd come in sometimes wearing a tie with the little fish, symbols of course Christianity, and he'd say, "Hey, Mark, you see my tie?" I was kind of like a little kid, to be honest with you. I said, "Yeah, Jim." Jim loves to give the thumb up, and I give the thumbs up and everything. But yeah, Jim only worked with us a couple of years, but then we kept in touch. But really, when he got his jaw cancer, mouth cancer, he was given like a 12% chance of living, stage 4. But I connected immediately with him and certainly began prayer with him. He had already started to groan in his faith, and that was just, you could see it. And then when I was diagnosed with my stage 4 throat cancer, and it's the base of the tongue, it's mouth, it's a lot of the same things. It's head and neck cancer are threatening if you're stage 4. They can't metastasize. Mine did. Jim went through some horrible, awful surgeries. I can tell you that. He was in pain, but we text each other. We talked to each other. We certainly prayed for each other. And I've never, he really is the toughest guy I think I've ever met. And it wasn't for what he did on the football. We call him one of the toughest guys who ever played football. But his toughness through this cancer battle, knowing how much pain he was in, the odds he was fighting, but also to see how his wife Jill and his girls, his daughters, lifted him up. All his friends lifted him up. Whole family, the Kelly family is an amazing family. But he also, let me know often he was praying for me, and there's always setbacks. We always both experience setbacks, and we were pretty honest with each other as to what we were going through, what things we wouldn't share publicly. And it was a source of strength that it's like having a support group, and Jim was very much part of that.
Yeah. I mean, when you're having a tough day and you can send a text or call someone up that has a different level of understanding in terms of what you're dealing with, because they're dealing with something that is in some way pretty darn similar, you can gain a different sense of strength there.
You can, and I just know that. I knew, like, when he was, cancer came back and he was going to have to go through a major jaw reconstruction. And I remember I was actually at the draft in Dallas. I texted him. I said, "Be honest, how much are you hurting?" And he said, "I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. It's the most pain I've ever felt." Now, I just shared a story that I don't think Jim will mind me sharing because it's a few years down the line. But for Jim Kelly to tell you that the pain was excruciating and he would never wish it upon his worst enemy.
Right.
It told me how much he was hurting, and I stopped, as soon as I could and prayed for him.
Yeah.
And continued.
He's an example of, it strikes me, someone that you have seen live their faith in action, right? Like you saw his faith grow over the course of challenges that he's faced in his life. Who are some other people that you believe to be examples of people who are not just talking the talk, like Reggie White, like Jim Kelly, but also walking the walk?
Well, there are so many. That's the neat thing about it. There's so many. When the Kurt Warner story is still one of the greatest stories that ever has happened in the history of the NFL.
No doubt.
Trent Green was their quarterback with the Rams. I remember when Rodney Harrison hit him in the knee in a preseason game. I can't remember where I was, but I remember it was a hotel. I was on the road, and I called Dick Vermeil the next day because Trent Green was wiped out. His season was over.
Right.
And I said, Dick, what are you going to do for a quarterback? He says, well, we got a guy named Kurt Warner we like a lot. We're going to go with Kurt Warner. I said, who is Kurt Warner? Tell me something about him. And he actually said, well, it's pretty simple. He goes, every time he gets out there, he goes, he hits the open man and he hits the open man in stride, and he's pretty good. I said, really? Former grocery boy.
Right, NFL exactly.
Reject, a guy who was a 4-string quarterback with the Green Bay Packers out of Northern Iowa who, really didn't even want to go out and take too many snaps because it was tough. But we all know Kurt Warner's story, and Kurt has shared it. He's a Hall of Famer. But I want to tell you one that is interesting, just about people not being ashamed of their faith. It goes, and this one's going to catch people off guard, I think. It goes to the mid-'60s. I grew up in LA. I grew up a Dodgers fan. TV wasn't on, it wasn't on TV all the time. But bottom line is that Sandy Koufax practiced his Jewish faith, and he did it in the World Series. He would not pitch a key World Series game because of Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, as you know. Sure. And it just struck me, even though I was not of the Jewish faith, how strong your faith had to be to basically say, I'm sorry, I can't do this. I have to honor my faith. And it showed such character that it stayed with me forever, to be quite honest with you. And it's weird because I actually got to know Sandy a little bit when I started covering the Dodgers and traveling with the Dodgers, because Sandy would come to spring training in Dodger Town at Vero Beach, Florida, every year. And so that was one. That was one. Phillip Rivers, by the way. I mean, he just retired. He could have come back to the Colts this year, but he was just ready. He was ready to go coach high school football. I think he could have been a candidate for one of the booths covering pro football. And I know he'd have been approached the year before, but his Catholic faith is so embedded in him. Him and his wife Tiffany, I think, have 9 kids. If I given him one more, he won't mind. But he wanted to go down. It's like, I'm not going to go make millions being an announcer. I'm going to go coach at I think it's St. Michael's school near Mobile, Alabama, be the high school coach. And that's what he wanted. But he was never ashamed of his faith. He practiced it. And I mean, in his messages. So Phil was just one of the guys, most beloved guys that for me anyways. But Tony Dungy, the head coach, with the Colts, the Buccaneers, and the Colts, Tony had you could see the humble way. When he didn't get a job for a while, even I said, well, I'm not sure Tony has a presence. You always imagine a Vince Lombardi or getting up in front of a group of guys, right? But Tony has a presence. That's what I learned about him. But it's and he has, Chuck Noll was his coach with the Steelers. But Tony, when he was at the Colts, his oldest son took his own life during maybe their best season, and it just everybody was floored by it. And I think that team might have gone on, certainly, possibly to win the Super Bowl, but it impacted everybody. But Tony was still strength. He was there for his wife Lauren and his other children, and as you know, since he's retired, they've adopted. They're always adopting, and Tony just as he was a guy with a calming influence. And Peyton Manning often has talked about being a Tony being a calming influence during the course of a game. And I think that influence wasn't just, it came from within and in his faith, but he was also a heck of a football coach as well.
Sure. And he talks about his commitment to his Bible study throughout the course of their Super Bowl winning season, and in his book of devotionals, he writes about some of those and how he would share them with his team and how he felt like they really shaped the trajectory of that team and helped them throughout the course of that season to go on and win a championship.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And they won so many games. They won so many games. He didn't win a Super Bowl in Tampa Bay, but he set the table for John Gruden to come in and win in that Super Bowl. Sure. And the players will tell you that. And John doesn't begrudge him that at all, knowing what Tony has done. And so he's one of the great influences, even in his post-playing. Yes, he's announcing, but he's got an all-pro dad ministry, and he has so much of an outreach and still being an influence upon his own family and others' extended family, like we like to say.
I guess on the flip side of it, like the non-football well-known people, right? That because the intersection goes both ways, right? Like you see people who are on the professional side of football who live their faith outwardly. And then you see people on the faith side who are huge football fans. And there's an intersection there as well.
Jade, I've never had a pastor who wasn't a football fan. It's always amazing me. And some of them, kind of shared that they wish they were a football coach. But I mean, they were kind of joking, but I think they were serious.
Yeah.
But listen, I've told the story of how I eventually, surrendered my life to Christ. Just my wife Mickey, used to play radio on our intercom in Atlanta, right. and from about 8 a.m. till noon, these great Christian ministers would come on, and you'd be trying to work, and then you stop maybe and listen to some of it. And I can remember two guys in particular, Dr. David Jeremiah, who his dad, he's the father of Daniel Jeremiah of NFL Network, and there's a story about that. But also Tony Evans, Dr. Tony Evans out of Dallas. His own son, Jonathan, had been an undrafted free agent, played football, but they were just, like David Jeremiah. The Super Bowl was in San Diego one year, well, more than 1 year. He used to be there quite a bit. I can remember going out there, and we were out there like 8 days early, and we had the Sunday off before the Super Bowl. In other words, it was the off weekend before the Super Bowl. We didn't have a Pro Bowl. We did, that weekend. And I can remember calling Mickey up. I said, "What's the name of the church that Dr. Jeremiah's at?" And he goes, "It's an Escondido." And so, he has Turning Point Ministry. So I actually went to church and got there early because I knew he had a pretty good crowd, congregation.
Sure.
And next thing I know, I got a couple people coming up to me asking me if I was Chris Mortensen of ESPN. I said, yeah. And then next thing I know, I'm getting an invitation to go to Dr. David Jeremiah's house for lunch. And it was there where, like, Daniel Jeremiah was home from school from Appalachian State, I think, and he was like, "What's Chris Mortensen doing in our house?" Which is funny.
How did he end up at our table?
And I'm thinking, what am I doing in David Jeremiah's house? And so we remained very close. Tony Evans, he is just, he was, there was a group called Promise Keepers. Not everybody was crazy about it, but it was, just about men becoming true men of God. So Tony Evans, that's where I first heard him speak in person. And then, but I'd listened to him on the radio, and he always just dynamic, great message, great man of God. His son Jonathan has followed in his footsteps, and just want to, also acknowledge that he lost his wife Lois within the past year, which was a sad moment for people who knew him. But there's so many, like I say, a lot of pastors. Ronnie Floyd, pastor, I think he wants to be a football coach. His son is a high school football coach. His son Nick has followed in his footsteps, and there's just been so many people that I can think of, and that just I say, wow. I said, every pastor loves football, and half of them want to be football coaches.
It's funny because I've sat in my own church, and our pastor retired about a year or so ago. But I still remember the Sunday that my husband and I were sitting there, and he starts into his sermon by talking about the Philadelphia Eagles and Nick Foles leading Bible study the night before they played in the Super Bowl against the New England Patriots. And my husband is an Eagles fan, so he's looking at me and he's like, I really like this sermon.
That is so funny. That is, yeah.
But there are, there are parallels, I think, that you can draw in terms of the challenges that are presented to you in football and the challenges that are presented to you in life, and how leaning on your faith can help you through those challenges. And that's not to say that, like, the things that you deal with on the football field have the same impact that they do as the things that you deal with in life, because clearly it's a game and life is different.
Right.
But I still think that there's a parallel that can be drawn there. It's like I tell my kids, there's things that you can learn through sports that will help you when it comes to navigating life.
Well, listen, that's very true. And say you're a fan of a particular sport like crazy, and I know my son says this occasionally, which is, football. Let's just use football as an example. It's a great game, but it makes a terrible God. But it does teach you a lot of lessons in terms of, we know we're going to have trials and tribulations in life. It's in the Bible. Yep. We know we're going to be, there's going to be many discouraging times, and we're going to be put to the test. And that's going to be from start to finish. That doesn't end. But many joyous occasions, certainly. But I think it's a chance to and when you're at your lowest, and I've had low moments, certainly low moments, and where I've had to say, I give up, Lord. You take it. This is all these 6 things right now are overwhelming me. You take it. I can't handle it. And you know what? He does.
Sure.
And so I've seen that happen for a lot of people, and hopefully their children grasp onto that. And I think there's just, some people say it's a crutch. Well, okay, that's fine. It's my crutch. I always tell people, I said, if you had one question in life that you should answer or ask and then try to answer is there a God? And then I would say, and what does that mean? And is Jesus who he says he was? And what does that mean? And I would just encourage anybody, call time out, ask the question, you seek the answer earnestly, and see where it takes you. I just think it's foolish not to look around and even at the birth. How many kids do you have now, Jade?
4.
Yeah, every birth is, to me, I know is a miracle, is manifestation that there is a God, there's a creator. It's a miracle.
It's interesting that you sort of circle back to that point about people should ask that question, because I believe, just from previous conversations with you, that's a question that Reggie White had to ask himself, and really had to go on that journey.
He did. There was a time, listen, there was no question, he was an ordained Baptist minister, but I think he grew a little bit disenchanted with the church, and so he kind of went on this incredible Hebrew, the history of the church, and studied Hebrew, even learned to talk Hebrew. I mean, we'd have these incredible talks, and I'd ask him a bunch of questions, and but it also eventually came around to, and he talked about Jesus' name in Hebrew is Yeshua. And he would actually call him, he would never call him Jesus again. He always referred to him as Yeshua. And as he studied, he eventually came to this, just as Abraham was, when Abraham was credited with righteousness by the Lord because he believed, and was redeemed. Reggie came all full circle around on an incredible journey to understand that his faith was not in vain, not in vain, and our faith and trust is to be in the Lord and the Lord only. It's not in man, because there's man will let us down
every time.
Says a woman, the flesh lets us down. We all know that. That's why the Lord sent us a Savior. And I've always told people, they always ask me about my cancer. You're worried about dying? Well, I'm not a worrier. I think my wife, Mickey, worries more about that than me. But I'm not trying to say I'm some courageous, but it's also okay to be selfish about it. Because I always like to tell the story of Jesus being in the Garden of Gethsemane, knowing why he came to this earth to give his life and pay it for our sins. He knew what the ending was going to be. And yet in the Garden of Gethsemane, knowing that there were Roman soldiers who were coming to get him, and it wasn't Romans who killed him, it wasn't Jews who killed him, this was how God ordained it. He still asked the Lord if he could just remove the cup of death from his lips. You know, it's kind of what he wanted. Even he wanted to stay on earth a little bit longer, but then in the end, he said, not my will, but your will, Lord. So even Christ experienced all the things that we do on this earth. And I just, and I've told you before, it's like, you know, I'm selfish. I want to stay here longer with my family, but I also have great faith in the eternity. I believe I'm on an eternal walk. I've done some studying about heaven. Randy Alcorn wrote a great book about heaven. Dr. Jeremiah has had great sermons about heaven. And I'm, you know, when I do get there, I'm going to be excited to get there. I really am. I'm not sure exactly where we're getting, but the Bible tells us a lot about it. And I think we're all going to have jobs. You know, I don't know what my job is going to be because I wasn't very good at mowing lawns. You know, I mean, I'm certainly not going to be an NFL insider, but one of these days I'll find out. That's for sure. But it'll all be in the glory of the Lord.
And we hope that day is not anytime soon. I think you're entitled to being selfish. Where do you feel like you're in right now in your own walk with your faith, Mort?
Yeah, I feel like I'm in a place of peace right now. I went through, it was weird after went through the cancer, and you know, the cancer metastasized to my lungs. We got that under control pretty well. You know, where I felt like I was getting lukewarm. I'm sitting there saying, why? Of all the times you should be red hot for the Lord, it's like you're closer to him than ever before in terms of like me, you know. And but I got a little bit lukewarm, but all of a sudden, you know, really kind of just got back to this peace, more in my Bible. I don't know if you ever heard of John Maxwell.
Sure.
He's a leadership speaker.
Amazing.
I got to know John.
Amazing speaker.
I got to know John. He used to be a pastor, but he went into leadership. And I'll tell you a quick story. One time John told me, this about 20 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. He said, how much time do you spend on devotional in the morning? I said, about 15 minutes before I get started working. He said, why don't you try an hour? I said, an hour? An hour? And he actually had a devotional study called An Hour with God. And I found that at the end of the hour, I wanted another hour. Now I didn't do it, but it was amazing that, you know, having the discipline to have that devotional, which I have it again, is remarkable. And I think it kind of helps you start your day in faith and in hope. And hopefully you can share it and touch somebody. And as Jesus told, I don't know, it was the Pharisees who were trying to trick him on the greatest commandment, but as you know, he said there's two. And one is to love God with all your heart and soul and mind. And the other one was to love your neighbor as yourself. And when people want to know about my politics or anything else, I feel like there's the two commandments. You know, there's my politics right there. If we could all do that, we'd be just fine.
Oh, we really would. Love takes us further than anything else. There is zero question about that. And I agree with you, because you start your day in your Bible and it puts those words on your heart and it puts them in your mind and it puts them on your tongue, and it just puts you in a different place in terms of how you interact, not only with yourself, but with the community around you. And when you lead with love, we all get further.
Right. And I might have some friends that say, well, I don't believe that. Knowing how he acts. So,
hey, no one said we weren't human, right? I mean, we all make mistakes.
We are human. But if I ever I'm trying to introduce anybody to the Bible, because the Bible sometimes can read like a foreign language to them, I say, just read the Gospel of John. That's the Gospel of love.
That's the place to start. So, that is the place to start. And there's so many different, you know, translations of it now that I think that makes it easier too. You know, I think about being a kid and like everything was like King James, and I was like, I feel like I'm reading Shakespeare. Like, this is not easy. Yes. There's other ways to wrap your hands around it now that I think makes it just much more accessible, I guess would be the word I would use.
Yeah, I agree with you. Absolutely.
Well, Mort, this has been so much fun. Thanks for taking the time and for being here with us, and just sharing some of these amazing stories that you've seen at the intersection of the National Football League and some baseball, of course, with Sandy Koufax, and faith. It's really been, it's been wonderful. Thank you.
And great here too, Jade. Great to see you again, and I'm sure we'll catch up down the road.
Sounds good.
God bless you.